Hello everyone in Perth. My name is Ted Hui, and thanks for letting me speak and participate, although remotely, but to speak to you about my personal experience and how I've suffered and Hong Kongers have suffered from the governance of the CCP, the Hong Kong regimes. And I'll also talk about recent developments in Hong Kong and of course how we are feeling deep inside about losing our friends, um, them being thrown to jail, and what lessons the Hong Kongers have learned from the fight against authoritarian CCP regimes, and of course what we should do and should be continuing uh, our advocacy work. So I'll start off by introducing myself a little bit. I'm Ted Hui, and left Hong Kong since 6 months ago. I was in face of a dilemma. Uh, on one hand, of course, I could continue to speak up for Hong Kong's freedom and democracy. On the other hand, I know for sure that I'll be thrown to jail if I stay in Hong Kong, and in that situation, I cannot continue my advocacy work for Hong Kong. I served in the Hong Kong legislature for the past 4 years, and I participated frequently in the frontline protest in the Hong Kong freedom movement, what we call the anti-extradition movement. And I experienced, of course, in frontline protest firsthand police brutality, and I've seen and I've tasted all the weapons being used by the CCP regimes, the Hong Kong police, all the tear gas, all the water cannon, all the pepper sprays, rubber bullets, and it's still in my mind, and I will remember forever how young protesters were beaten up, were captured, arrested, injured during the movement, and even a few of them lost their lives in the movement. So at the time I left Hong Kong, I was bearing 9 criminal charges against me. For example, for contempt of the legislature, which is ridiculous because I was a legislator at that time. And of course, charges like perverting the course of justice involving my actions, uh, my participations in the street with the protesters, and of course some other charges against me for my speech and actions during my protest inside the Hong Kong Parliament, and of course some charges involving uh, allegations of money laundering because I raised some public funds to sue the Hong Kong police and the Hong Kong government. And so it's an easy excuse for the regimes for accusing me of using the money, misappropriating the money improperly. So I also suffered at the time I left Hong Kong because on second day on my exile, the Hong Kong regime actually frozen my bank account, but not only my bank account, but also my family's, all my direct family's bank accounts. So it can be quite terrifying. So suddenly, and your life saving, my parents' life saving, like vanished because of nothing they have done. So the recent development in Hong Kong, of course, there's an enforcement, an introduction of an draconian law called National Security Law. It's already in place. So under that draconian law, we lost all our freedom overnight. Now, chanting a slogans is criminalized, posting opinion on Facebook is illegal. So expressing our political views against the government, be in opposition, it's illegal. You get arrested and you get uh, brought to court and thrown to jail because of these. So it's a total collapse of our freedoms. and of course not only our freedom, but our rule of law and our judicial independence. So not only that, in Hong Kong, there's also a change of electoral systems last month. So in future Hong Kong so-called elections, there will be political vetting by the Hong Kong government. The Hong Kong government will decide which persons that they like, which person will be eligible to run for public offices, to run as legislators, as the head of Hong Kong themselves. They will decide all these themselves. And the composition of the of our legislature will be also dramatically changed. There will be appointed seats, basically appointed by Beijing, and there will be appointed politicians, and so adding up to the majority of the seats in our legislature. How uncivilized, how stepping backward can that be? Also, more than that, on top of that, there will be oath-taking law to control public officers. So all elected members at different levels, at municipal level and at national levels, have to take oath to pledge allegiance, to pledge loyalty to Beijing. Otherwise, they will be disqualified directly, and there can be criminal charges against them. And last but not least, the Hong Kong regime has introduced a travel ban, basically, for Hong Kongers from leaving Hong Kong. So starting in the first day of August, that piece of legislation will be in place. So the regimes will have the power to ban anyone from boarding any aircraft, any ship, or any boat for leaving Hong Kong. So Hong Kong will soon turn into a bigger prison itself without the need of putting everyone in jail. So what does it feel like for me? Of course, my heart is very heavy, uh, making the decision to leave Hong Kong, to leave all my loved ones and my memories. I grew up all my life in Hong Kong. Now I have to make a clear cut. I know that perhaps in decades or in the rest of my life, I cannot go back. My heart is really heavy. I never wanted to leave my place, my home. Of course, anyone can move to a different place and call it home, but still, my root is in Hong Kong. It is also very painful to see that my comrades, all the other freedom fighters, activists, politicians, thrown to jails. Nowadays, I feel like I have more friends in jail than my friends in freedom, if you have to count. So, can you imagine those freedom fighters, those who marched with me all these years in the streets for freedoms, all those parliamentarians, elected members of parliament who sat next to me, just next to me in parliament chamber. We struggled for years, and we've been through so much as colleagues, as uh, activists for so many years. Now I've suddenly lost them all. Suddenly we've lost contact because they are in jail. Can you imagine that happening? So, what lesson have Hong Kong learned after the 2019 freedom movement? I understand that, of course, to you, it's an easy understanding that you can't trust CCP and you can't even negotiate or you even make any compromise with CCP. And but for Hong Kong people, it's not that easy because in Hong Kong for the past 24 years after the handover to China, it's been a solemn promise our written promise in our basic law, our mini constitution, and it's made international publicly that Hong Kong will develop its own democracy towards universal suffrage, and it's a promise of democracy. And there was also a promise to the world about Hong Kong's freedom, that Hong Kong people will be ruling Hong Kong, that Hong Kong will be unchanged with its legal system. And so we tried in the past to trust that, and we put up with that, and we had hope that it would go along the promises made, but then of course only to find that we are all fooled by the CCP. So after years by years of our promise being broken, now Hong Kongers has finally waken up, I would say, after the 2019, that we understand that it's not through negotiations or making compromises or discussing with CCP at the table. It's through struggles, it's through resistance that we maintain our dignities and our pride in our fight for freedom. And we know that freedom will only come that way, but not by the mercy of CCP and waiting passively. We should all fight, and we should fight back against it. And now Hong Kong has woken up, and so should other nations and groups. What should we do in such desperate times? Of course, with my status overseas, we asked for sanctions, international sanctions, targeted sanctions, individual ones, economic sanctions, and we also asked for lifeboat plans, lifeboat schemes for different nations to provide, so that those who are in trouble, those who are persecuted by the CCP, can have a safe place to go to. But more importantly, I believe it is to strengthen and expand our diasporic communities overseas. It is really very, very, very important, and this is also one point that we have learned, that we should preserve our unique social and national identity. In our case, we now only call ourselves Hong Kongers, but not Chinese, because we are unique. And so it is important for people like you and me, victims of CCPs, fighters, to be this bigger stakeholder, to be the bigger influence, to be the bigger voice internationally. So if we are stronger, if we are more united, then we are more powerful in having international communities, free world leaders to listen to us and to make a change. So I think it can only be done collectively by those who also suffered, by those who had enough of CCP. For those of you, we are in solidarity. So it can only be done by nurturing our civil society, your culture and my culture, your people and our peoples. So it will be very useful to make use of the multi-alliance, and I hope that people will join it and it will grow stronger and bigger. And I just like to stress that even in our case in Hong Kong, we have lost a lot. We are stripped of all our rights, our democratic rights, and fundamental basic freedom. But Hong Kongers have definitely not given up. Our spirits are still high, and our anger is still in our hearts. We are just waiting for an opportunity for the people to rise again. Of course, we need an international hand from different nations. In the Hong Kong protest, we have a slogan called "Be Water," and also another slogan called "Stronger Together." Now, Hong Kongers are being water. That means that waters can be powerful, waters are flexible, and of course, water will come back all together, and we will beat our enemy. So I believe that not only Hong Kongers has not given up, the Uyghur, the Burmese, the Taiwanese, the Tibetan, the Vietnamese, I can see the spirits are still high, just like Hong Kongers. They have not given up. So I also believe authoritarian governments, tyrannies won't last forever. It will be a long fight, but I trust that we are far from losing as long as we are united. We tie ourselves together. We are the voice against CCP, and we are stronger and stronger together. Finally, just my final remark, and I really appreciate all the efforts that you have ever made and for organizing this event, this rally, and you are the brave people, and we need a lot more brave people to join the fight. Thank you for listening to me and for every effort ever made in fighting back against CCP and upholding the value of freedom and democracy. I'm sure I will join all of you again in future and see you in person one day.